The alien commanders sat in the warmth of their ship's command center, sneering at the screen as the hologram projected Earth's northernmost region, a barren expanse of ice and snow, stretching for miles in every direction. To them, it looked like a wasteland, a frozen, primitive land that held no real challenge. Earth itself was considered a backwater, but this tundra? It was laughable, a place so hostile even the humans barely inhabited it. The aliens were accustomed to planets rich with resources, their conquests a matter of quick overpowering. In their eyes, the tundra was a weak spot, a joke. "Deploy the scouts," one commander ordered, smirking as he watched the icy plains roll by. "Humans call this home? They're more pathetic than I thought." Beneath them, the ships touched down in formation, sending a fresh burst of snow scattering in the Arctic wind. Troops disembarked in sleek lines, each soldier suited in advanced armor designed to regulate temperature and monitor the atmosphere. The cold bit at them, harsh and unforgiving, but they brushed it off as inconsequential. They were outfitted for all environments, engineered to handle everything from deserts to arid mountains. A tundra should have been no different. They set up forward operating bases, establishing perimeters and beginning their march deeper into the wilderness. Alien drones scouted the area, their infrared scans slicing through the snowstorm to map the terrain. But every step, every meter forward became more difficult than anticipated. The technology that had made them untouchable on other worlds seemed to falter, the harsh cold seeping into circuits, making screens flicker and signals weaken. At first, it was dismissed as minor technical issues, something easily fixed with recalibration. But it didn't stop. Equipment began failing at random. Vehicles designed to roll over harsh terrain stalled, their power cells draining faster than anticipated. Scanners glitched, struggling to maintain clear visuals through the constant snow flurries. The air was heavier, sharper than expected, cutting through their breaths as the cold leached into their very bones. The aliens, so used to perfect precision, began to feel the effects, the early signs of wear on their flawless exterior. Their first encounters with the tundra's native predators only fueled their contempt. Wolves, barely a shadow against their superior weaponry, skulked around the outskirts of their camps, taking down isolated soldiers foolish enough to wander too far. The aliens laughed it off, brushing aside these minor nuisances as they continued their march, the pristine white landscape stretching endlessly before them. It was only the beginning, but the arrogance of their leaders carried them forward. They believed the planet would yield as all others had, bending under their superior firepower and technology. As they pressed forward, an unexpected silence grew around them. The tundra absorbed sound, muffling footsteps and voices, creating an eerie stillness. Each time they deployed troops further ahead, the wind seemed to howl louder, an unbroken whisper that heightened the tension. The silence, combined with the unyielding cold, left even the most hardened among them uneasy, though they wouldn't admit it. They trudged onward, losing track of time, disoriented by the endless white landscape. Hours turned to days, and the temperature continued to drop, reaching extremes that strained even the most advanced suits. Inside their helmets, the aliens could feel the bite of the cold, a chilling reminder of their miscalculations. Their reliance on technology had dulled their survival instincts, leaving them vulnerable to the planet's elemental wrath. This land, this frozen hell, was nothing like they'd expected. It was fierce, unforgiving, and utterly indifferent to their presence. Soon, equipment failures turned from inconveniences to outright liabilities. Communication between squads became choppy, with signals fading as the storms intensified. Batteries froze, drones dropped out of the sky mid-flight, and thermal optics became unreliable, struggling to detect life forms in the relentless cold. Every piece of equipment, every ounce of technology they'd counted on, was rendered unstable, and for the first time, the alien commanders felt a creeping sense of unease. Reports filtered in from the perimeter units. Some soldiers claimed they saw movement in the snow, shadows passing between ridges, moving low and fast. But every time they aimed, the figures would disappear, vanishing into the snow as if they'd never been there. The commanders dismissed the reports as exhaustion-induced hallucinations, laughing off the idea that the humans would challenge them here, in this deadly environment. But the laughter faded quickly. As the days dragged on, they realized they weren't alone. Tracks appeared in the snow around their camps, fresh and deliberate. Footprints, too large and heavy to be from native creatures, circled their tents and vehicles, patterns of movement that seemed planned, intentional. Each time they followed the tracks, they vanished, swallowed by the unending snowfall. It became clear that someone, or something, was observing them, studying their patterns and movements with a patience and familiarity they couldn't match. The aliens began to grow uneasy, realizing that they were the ones being hunted. Shadows flitted through their periphery, darting in and out, impossible to track for more than a moment. It was as if the snow itself had come alive, hiding creatures who knew this land far better than they did. And that's when the first soldier vanished. One moment, he was patrolling the edge of the camp, and the next, he was gone, his transmission cutting off mid-sentence. A search party scoured the area, looking for signs of a struggle, for anything to explain the disappearance. They found nothing but a single set of footprints in the snow, leading out of the camp and into the empty white horizon. Then another soldier disappeared. And another. Each time, it was the same. The figure would be there one moment, then gone the next, leaving nothing but faint tracks as a reminder. Panic began to ripple through the ranks. Alien soldiers, unaccustomed to the cold and isolated from support, were now facing an enemy they couldn't see, in a land they didn't understand. Their arrogant laughter was long gone, replaced by hushed whispers and anxious glances. The cold no longer seemed an inconvenience. It was a constant threat, sapping their strength, slowing their reflexes. The terrain, once mocked as a barren wasteland, had become a formidable opponent in its own right, hiding dangers they couldn't anticipate. The alien commanders, struggling to maintain control, ordered stricter protocols, tighter formations. But it didn't stop the disappearances. The aliens were now trapped in a hostile, unrelenting landscape, under siege by an invisible enemy who knew the tundra's every corner, every drift and hollow. They realized too late that they had ventured into a world that had already claimed them, a world they could never hope to conquer. And as the wind howled around them, cutting through their armor, a new, unsettling thought settled in. The tundra wasn't an obstacle to overcome. It was a battlefield, one where they were hopelessly outmatched. The aliens moved cautiously now, their earlier confidence replaced by an uneasy vigilance. Patrols were doubled, equipment checks became obsessive, and commanders reminded their troops to stay alert. But it didn't matter how many orders they issued, something out there was watching, waiting, and it was only a matter of time before it struck again. The alien troops were used to facing organized resistance, military fronts, and tactical responses. They weren't prepared for shadows that appeared and vanished, leaving only silence and the unsettling sense that they were surrounded. The attacks began in earnest on the second night. A patrol group of 5 moved out, covering a perimeter as ordered. They trudged through knee-high snow, their footsteps muffled by the endless expanse. But suddenly, without warning, a figure broke through the darkness and snow. A flash of white, almost indistinguishable against the frozen landscape, then another, silhouettes moving with inhuman speed and precision. The aliens barely had time to raise their weapons before one soldier dropped, a precise blow severing their suit's thermal regulator, plunging them instantly into the raw cold. By the time the remaining soldiers turned to respond, the shadows had already disappeared. 3 of them fired wildly into the dark, the sounds swallowed by the snow and ice, but their bullets meant nothing. There was only the wind and the faint outline of footprints in the snow, quickly disappearing as the storm covered the tracks. The survivors gathered close, eyes darting around, unsure of where the next attack would come from. The humans struck fast and often. Each time, they emerged only long enough to take down a target before vanishing back into the blizzard. They were relentless, ghosts blending into the tundra, moving as if the cold was part of them. The aliens, despite their training, were helpless against this new kind of warfare. They couldn't see their enemy, couldn't anticipate the strikes. They only saw flashes, the barely perceptible movements in the corner of their vision, each one accompanied by the loss of another comrade. In the command tents, the alien leaders tried to make sense of the attacks. Their troops were losing ground, morale was crumbling, and every attempt to fight back only seemed to lead to more losses. Thermal imaging scans showed nothing but empty landscapes. Motion detectors failed to pick up the brief, lightning-fast movements of the human attackers. Each night, more patrols went missing, and each day, more soldiers found themselves exhausted, sleep-deprived, haunted by the relentless, invisible force that stalked them. The alien commanders attempted a counterattack, deploying drones outfitted with heat sensors and motion trackers, convinced that advanced tech would spot their enemy. But the humans anticipated it. They rigged decoys, heat signatures positioned along ridges and ice caves, leading the drones in circles. When the drones finally locked onto a target, it was a trick, a simple heating unit buried under layers of snow, deliberately set up to mislead them. By the time the aliens figured it out, another squad had gone silent, their last transmissions cutting out mid-breath. The human forces moved with uncanny precision. They knew the tundra, every ridge, every hidden cave, using the landscape to mask their movements. In one ambush, a group of alien soldiers found themselves in a narrow ravine, surrounded on both sides by towering walls of ice. As they advanced, cautiously scanning the surroundings, humans emerged from above, camouflaged in white, blending perfectly with the snow-covered cliffs. The attack was swift. A hail of bullets and grenades rained down, trapping the aliens in a crossfire they had no hope of escaping. By the time the last alien fell, the humans had already vanished into the snow, leaving nothing but the silence of the frozen ravine. The relentless nature of the ambushes took its toll. Alien forces, once prideful and disciplined, began to unravel. Panic seeped through the ranks as soldiers jumped at every sound, every shifting shadow. They were supposed to be the superior species, yet here they were, hunted and helpless, their technology rendered useless in the face of a force they couldn't see or counter. Their suits, meant to regulate temperature and protect them from the elements, became cumbersome and heavy, slowing them down, making them easy targets in the endless white. One by one, the alien outposts were overtaken, isolated camps succumbing to the brutal efficiency of the human special forces. Each base found itself cut off, communications severed, and by the time reinforcements tried to respond, all they found were empty camps littered with the equipment of those who had been lost. Supplies dwindled as convoys failed to return, the once steady flow of resources dwindling to nothing. The tundra, silent and unyielding, became an unbreakable wall between them and survival. Inside the command center, the alien leaders struggled to maintain control. Every report was the same: ambushes, disappearances, attacks without warning, leaving their soldiers frozen, abandoned in the unforgiving snow. The commanders, so used to victory, now faced a reality they had never prepared for. Their forces were being decimated by an enemy who was invisible, relentless, and entirely in control of the environment. The humans knew the landscape like the back of their hands, using its every feature to their advantage, while the aliens stumbled, lost and disoriented. At one point, an alien officer managed to capture a brief video of the human attackers. The footage was grainy, barely decipherable through the storm, but it showed enough: humans, clad in white camouflage, moving with calculated, practiced ease, silent as the snow itself. They were agile, efficient, trained to kill and disappear without leaving a trace. The aliens replayed the footage again and again, searching for weaknesses, anything they could exploit, but all they found was a reminder of their own vulnerability. The tundra was unforgiving, a battleground that took more than strength to survive. And for the first time, the aliens understood that they were outmatched, not by numbers or technology, but by a species that had adapted to the impossible, that knew how to turn even the most hostile environment into a weapon. The aliens, once dismissive and arrogant, found themselves humbled, reduced to desperate survivors in a land that showed them no mercy. Alien Command, shaken but unwilling to admit defeat, doubled down on countermeasures, convinced they could still turn the tides. They recalibrated their thermal imaging to detect faint signals, deployed advanced drones with state-of-the-art radar, and equipped every soldier with enhanced tracking devices. Alien leaders assured the troops that these new systems would reveal the human positions, flushing them out of their hiding places in the tundra. But the humans were already one step ahead. They had masked their body heat with insulating layers, embedding themselves so deeply in the tundra that they were all but invisible to the aliens' thermal sensors. Ice caves and snow drifts became their hiding spots, naturally blending their signatures with the surrounding cold. When the drones scanned the area, all they found were glacial formations, empty expanses of snow and ice, and the unchanging silence of the frozen wasteland. Alien forces, disoriented and exhausted, were given new orders to sweep the area in groups, spreading out in coordinated grid patterns. The commanders believed this tactic would cover more ground, reducing the chances of ambush. But as the squads spread thinner, they only became easier targets. The humans had mapped the terrain meticulously, identifying ambush points and defensible spots. Each time an alien squad ventured too far from their base, they were struck down, swift and silent. No stray bullet, no wasted movement, just precise, calculated strikes. The human attacks came with a psychological edge. When an alien patrol would return to base, they'd find equipment missing, supplies rearranged, sometimes even footprints leading in circles around the camp. The humans left no bodies, only remnants of their presence, a constant reminder that they were watching. The aliens began to feel hunted, their every move tracked. They had become prey, and it weighed on them. Command decided to employ drastic measures. They set up traps, rigged explosives to detonate when triggered by nearby movement, and stationed snipers around their bases. For a moment, they believed they had finally anticipated human tactics. But when a perimeter sensor triggered an explosion, the only casualty was one of their own, misled by a human decoy, a faint heat source buried under snow that had lured the aliens into firing on their own ranks. Every tactic the aliens employed was countered, neutralized, and exploited. Morale continued to plummet. The unrelenting cold, the days without clear victory, and the eerie silence around them gnawed at the troops' nerves. They had arrived with bravado, dismissing the humans as primitive, backward beings. But the human soldiers weren't merely surviving. They were thriving in this frozen expanse, executing their every move with an expertise that defied the aliens' understanding. It was as if the tundra was part of them, an ally in their fight, and the aliens were interlopers trespassing in a place they could never conquer. At one point, in a desperate attempt to flush the humans out, the aliens deployed a new line of heavy artillery designed to level sections of the tundra. They bombarded suspected human positions, their shells detonating in explosions that sent snow and ice flying. But when the smoke cleared, they saw no sign of their targets, only untouched stretches of snow and the quiet, indifferent landscape. The humans had anticipated the bombardment, leaving empty caches and fake heat sources to divert the attack. The explosions only served to weaken the aliens' defenses, creating new hiding spots in the craters and reshaping the terrain to further favor the human ambushes. In every way possible, the humans remained beyond their reach. Their silence, their unpredictability, and their complete understanding of the environment were more powerful than any technology the aliens could deploy. Each alien weapon, each strategic adjustment, seemed only to deepen their disadvantage. The human forces didn't need overwhelming numbers or advanced weaponry. They simply waited, watching, letting the elements weaken their foes. As the cold intensified, so did the toll on the alien forces. Suits malfunctioned, power cells drained faster, and frostbite began to claim soldiers' extremities. The wind bit through their armor, the snow became an obstacle they couldn't overcome, and the endless white stretched on like a silent battlefield they could never conquer. The land itself seemed to be working against them, amplifying their every weakness, and all the while, the humans struck with precision and intent. Command's confidence was beginning to crumble. Desperation replaced strategy, and orders grew increasingly erratic, with squads sent on missions they could barely complete, pushing soldiers beyond their limits. Communication breakdowns were rampant, and the once cohesive ranks of alien forces became scattered, morale shattered by the relentless, invisible threat that seemed to close in with each passing day. They were no longer fighting an enemy they could see or understand. They were fighting the land, the silence, and the creeping fear that they had already lost. In a last effort, the alien commanders ordered a retreat to a central stronghold they had fortified near their landing site, hoping to consolidate what was left of their forces and regroup. But by now, the humans had anticipated every move, tracking their every step. The aliens found their retreat cut off, human forces blocking key routes and dismantling their supply lines. The very ground they attempted to escape across had become a hostile expanse, claimed by human forces who knew every crack, every drift, every hollow in the snow. And as the aliens tried to establish their final defenses, they felt the full weight of their mistake. This land, this frozen, barren place they had mocked, was not theirs to control. It belonged to the humans who had lived and trained in it, learned from it, and used it as a weapon in a way the aliens could never match. This tundra wasn't just a landscape, it was a fortress, and they had wandered into it, blind and unprepared. The realization struck them too late. The humans had taken their terrain, their tactics, and turned it all into a force beyond any technology the aliens possessed. This was no longer a battle. It was a reckoning. The tundra grew colder, harsher, as if the land itself had turned against the alien forces. Their technology, once reliable and impervious, now struggled to keep up with the unrelenting freeze. Suits that regulated temperature were pushed to their limits, with constant malfunctions. Communication lines crackled with interference, and the once clear feeds from command stations became riddled with static. Every system was fighting against the bitter cold, and the aliens felt the creeping exhaustion seep into their bones. They had come to expect some resistance from the elements, but this was different. Every breath felt like it crystallized in their lungs, and every step was a battle against winds so strong they could barely stay upright. The daylight hours were brief, shrouded in a dim, gray twilight that offered no comfort. Darkness stretched long and deep, swallowing up every inch of warmth they tried to maintain. In this environment, they were not conquerors, they were trespassers, vulnerable and stranded. They huddled together in makeshift shelters, no longer able to spread out across the tundra without losing soldiers to the cold and isolation. Patrols were shorter, movements slower. It was as if the humans were using the weather itself as a weapon, waiting for the cold to weaken their prey before striking again. Every hour that passed without an attack only heightened their tension, each soldier jumping at the slightest sound, their nerves worn thin by the silence and the biting cold. Then the next ambush struck. Human forces moved through the darkness, barely visible until it was too late. Alien guards, half frozen and barely awake, were taken down with quiet precision, their figures disappearing into the snow before any alarm could be raised. Each strike was quick and merciless, leaving no trace but footprints swiftly covered by the falling snow. The aliens tried to regroup, but their numbers had thinned, and their strength waned. For every skirmish they fought, they lost ground, morale slipping through their fingers like snow through an open hand. Inside their command outpost, alien leaders clung to the belief that reinforcements would come, that their home fleet would send backup, but with each passing hour, it became clear that no rescue was on the way. The Empire was far from Earth, and to them, this Tundra campaign was a minor operation, easily winnable. They had never anticipated such a prolonged, brutal encounter. And now, as their forces dwindled, the alien commanders understood the depth of their mistake. The humans attacked with increasing boldness, fully aware of the aliens' deteriorating condition. They struck in coordinated waves, exploiting the alien weaknesses with pinpoint accuracy. Each assault was a reminder that the humans had the upper hand, not in numbers or technology, but in sheer understanding of the land. They moved with the storm, using the snow to cover their movements, blending into the landscape until they seemed to be part of the tundra itself. Alien soldiers, conditioned to fight on open battlefields and controlled environments, were helpless here, outmaneuvered by a force they could neither see nor predict. Soon, the alien forces became their own worst enemy. Every shadow, every gust of wind seemed to conceal a human soldier ready to strike. Paranoia spread through their ranks, as troops fired blindly into the darkness, mistaking each other for enemies. Every shift of the snow became a threat, every noise a possible attack. And in this state of heightened fear, they lost more men to their own panic than to human strikes. With resources running low, the alien command tried to conserve what little they had left. Rations were cut, energy reserves were tightly rationed, and soldiers were ordered to huddle together in their frozen encampments. But the conditions were merciless, and the alien bodies, unaccustomed to such a hostile climate, began to falter. Soldiers succumbed to frostbite, their extremities numb and blackened, the life seeping from them as they struggled to stay warm. Medics were overwhelmed, treating the symptoms of exposure rather than wounds from battle. In the midst of this chaos, the humans launched one final, devastating strike. They waited until the cold was at its peak, when the night had stretched into a bleak, unbroken darkness, and the alien troops were too exhausted to do anything more than sit in silence, barely holding on. And then, without warning, the humans attacked from all sides, their movements swift and silent as they breached the last of the alien defenses. The assault was as much psychological as it was physical. The humans used the cover of darkness and the sound-muffling snow to isolate pockets of the alien forces, picking them off one by one. The alien soldiers, already weakened and disoriented, found themselves powerless against the onslaught. Some tried to fight back, but their shots went wide, their frozen fingers unable to grip their weapons properly. Others simply ran, stumbling through the snow, only to be intercepted and silenced by waiting human forces. By dawn, the alien encampments were silent, blanketed in a fresh layer of snow. The few survivors, those who had managed to evade capture, huddled together in the remnants of their base, the weight of defeat hanging heavy in the frozen air. The alien commanders, stripped of their forces, could no longer deny the reality they faced. They had been bested not by superior technology or numbers, but by a people who understood the terrain in a way they never could, a people who had made the cold, the darkness, and the tundra itself into their allies. The realization struck deep. They had entered this campaign with arrogance, laughing off the tundra as a barren wasteland, dismissing the humans as primitive defenders. But now, they understood that Earth's frozen reaches were as much a part of its strength as any army. This tundra, unforgiving and relentless, had been their undoing, a final barrier that separated them from victory. As the few remaining alien soldiers retreated, their heads bowed, they knew they'd been forced into submission by forces beyond their control. The tundra had claimed them, as it had countless others who underestimated its power. And as they left, defeated and broken, they could almost feel the humans watching from somewhere in the distance, hidden by the snow, ready to strike again should they ever return. The final remnants of the alien forces were in full retreat, their once proud ranks shattered by the brutal, unyielding environment and the relentless human forces that seemed to emerge from the very tundra itself. The last of their commanders had finally ordered a full withdrawal, abandoning any hope of salvaging the mission. Soldiers stumbled through the snow, their faces drawn and hollow, eyes darting at every sound. The haunting silence and bitter cold seemed to mock them with every step, reminding them of the utter defeat they could hardly comprehend. As they trudged back toward their landing zones, the terrain stretched endlessly before them, a frozen expanse that had stripped away their confidence and pride, leaving only a shadow of the force that had landed with such arrogance. They no longer looked like the conquerors they had been. Their armor was damaged, their advanced technology covered in frost, barely functional after weeks of exposure to the relentless cold. Every step felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion, and they no longer felt the urge to look forward. Every movement was simply an effort to survive, to escape the haunting land that had shown them no mercy. Behind them, the humans kept watch, unseen, as they'd done since the very beginning. Camouflaged within the landscape, they were invisible to alien scanners, mere shadows that moved with the wind and snow. The alien soldiers knew they were there, even if they couldn't see them. The humans had embedded themselves in the land, turning every ridge and every hollow into an ambush point, watching without need to engage further. They had won, and they knew it. Now, it was just a matter of letting the tundra itself finish what they had started. For the alien troops, the journey back became a trial in its own right. They faced the bitter cold with nothing left to fight against it, their equipment faltering as they lost power. Rations were gone, and they moved on empty stomachs, driven only by the fading hope of reaching their ships. With every hour that passed, another soldier fell, collapsing into the snow, too weak to rise again. They left them behind without ceremony, without glances, driven solely by the need to escape. In their minds they could still see flashes of the humans in white, the ghostly figures that had struck from nowhere, a presence that had haunted them from the moment they set foot on the tundra. Every sound in the distance, every shift in the snow seemed to carry an echo of those silent attacks. They had come to believe that the humans were something beyond mortal, that they were as much a part of this frozen land as the wind and the ice. When the alien forces finally saw the landing zone, they felt a surge of relief, but it was fleeting. Their ships, buried under layers of ice and snow, stood like silent, forgotten monuments. Engines had frozen over, systems stalled, and it became clear that even their escape was no longer guaranteed. They worked desperately, trying to unearth what they could, powering up systems in the hopes of one last flight to safety. In the midst of this chaos, a final transmission was sent back to their homeworld. The message was short, a stark contrast to the arrogance with which they had first arrived. It was a warning, a desperate account of everything they'd faced. The humans were not to be underestimated, they reported. Earth was not to be taken lightly, and its wilderness, its frozen, empty reaches, was a force unto itself. Their leaders needed to understand that they had failed not because of numbers or lack of firepower, but because they had entered a battlefield that belonged to humanity alone. Their warning was broadcast and received, though their superiors were hesitant to believe it. An entire elite force, broken not by superior weapons but by a landscape they had dismissed, by soldiers they deemed backward and primitive. And yet the survivors knew that those humans, hidden in the snow, had more strength and skill than any of them had anticipated. One by one, the few functioning ships lifted off, struggling against the storm that seemed to press down on them even in those final moments. As they ascended, the alien soldiers looked down at the endless white plains, the land that had become a living nightmare. Somewhere below, they knew the humans were watching, silent, unmoving, blending seamlessly with the tundra that had fought beside them. The aliens left with the haunting image of those hidden soldiers, a memory that would follow them back across the stars, a reminder of the folly of arrogance. Earth's tundra remained as it was, vast, frozen, seemingly untouched by the battle that had raged upon it. But now it was marked, in the minds of those who had dared to invade it, as an unconquerable domain. The humans, as much a part of the land as the ice and wind, were its defenders, invisible until it was too late. And as the alien ships disappeared from view, the silence of the tundra resumed, leaving only the memory of those who had come unprepared to face its wrath.